A billionaire CEO discovered her security guard studying programming by flashlight at 3 a.m. in the warehouse. What she did next shocked everyone, but when the board tried to fire them both for an imaginary scandal, the security guard walked into the boardroom with something that would save the company millions. This is the true story of how a flashlight in a dark warehouse changed two broken people forever. Larissa Caldwell had become the youngest CEO in Caldwell Industries' 70-year history, not through inheritance or luck, but through a combination of ruthless efficiency and an ability to see through people as if they were made of glass. At 34, she commanded boardrooms with the same cold precision a surgeon wielded a scalpel. Her platinum blonde hair, always pulled back in a severe bun, never showed a strand out of place. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of variations on the same theme: crisp white shirts, black pencil skirts, and gray trench coats that hung on her 5'9" frame-like armor. The employees whispered that she had no heart, that ice water ran through her veins, that she could fire someone while maintaining the same expression she wore reviewing quarterly reports. What they didn't know was that Larissa had learned to be cold the hard way. 5 years ago, she had trusted her business partner and fiancé with everything, only to discover he had been systematically embezzling funds while planning to frame her for the crime. The betrayal had carved something essential out of her, leaving behind only the sharp edges of ambition and the determination never to let anyone close enough to wound her again. She lived in her corner office, arriving before dawn and leaving after midnight. The company, her only companion. Success, her only comfort. Finn Whitaker carried his own ghosts, though they wore combat boots instead of business suits. At 28, he had the build of someone who had spent years carrying heavy loads across hostile terrain, 6 feet 1 inch of lean muscle that his security uniform couldn't quite hide. His brown hair, kept regulation short even 3 years after his discharge, framed a face that might have been carved from sandstone, all angles and weathered planes, except for his eyes. Those eyes, a warm brown that seemed perpetually amused by some private joke, belonged to someone who had learned that life's cruelest moments often came wrapped in mundane packaging. He had left the Marines not because he had to, but because he couldn't stomach another deployment after watching his squad leader, his mentor and friend, die from an IED that Finn should have spotted. The guilt had followed him home, a constant companion that made sleep difficult and trust harder. The security job at Caldwell Industries was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while he figured out what came next. But somewhere between the midnight rounds and the dawn patrols, Finn had discovered programming through a free online course, and it had given him something he thought he had lost forever: purpose. During his day shifts, Finn moved through the building like a ghost himself, checking badges, monitoring deliveries, walking the perimeter. But his colleagues had started to notice something unusual about him. When the loading dock's automated system glitched, leaving 3 trucks waiting in 90-degree heat, it was Finn who suggested a manual override sequence that got things moving again. When Margaret from HR couldn't figure out why her keycard kept demagnetizing, Finn explained the magnetic field from her tablet case and helped her find a solution. He never made a big deal of it, never claimed credit, just offered help with a quiet competence that made people remember him. Larissa had first noticed him 6 months ago. Not in person, but through the security footage she reviewed as part of her obsessive need to control every aspect of her domain. She had been looking for efficiency gaps in the night shift when she spotted him, sitting in the warehouse during his break, a textbook spread across his lap, a penlight between his teeth as he wrote code by hand in a notebook. Something about the image had lodged in her mind like a splinter. Here was someone working the loneliest shift in the building, making barely above minimum wage, and he was using every free moment to pull himself towards something better. It reminded her uncomfortably of herself. A decade ago, sleeping in her office to avoid going home to an empty apartment, teaching herself corporate law from library books because she couldn't afford proper courses. The next night, Larissa found herself in the warehouse at 2 in the morning. ostensibly to check the new inventory management system, but really to see if he would be there again. He was, this time working through what looked like algorithms, his flashlight propped against a box to free both hands for writing. She watched him for 20 minutes from behind a storage rack, noting the methodical way he approached each problem, the patience with which he worked through solutions, the small smile that crossed his face when he finally solved something particularly challenging. When she finally left, she felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest, as if something long frozen had begun, painfully, to thaw. The night everything changed started like any other. Larissa had been in her office since 6 that morning, working through a merger proposal that could either revolutionize the company or destroy it. By the time she looked up from her computer, it was past 1 in the morning, and the building was empty except for the night security staff. She decided to walk the warehouse floor, telling herself it was to clear her head, knowing it was really to see if Finn would be there. She found him in his usual spot, but this time his notebook was filled with something that made her stop in her tracks. He was designing an algorithm for automated warehouse navigation, an elegant solution to a problem that had been plaguing their logistics department for months. The code was handwritten but precise, with annotations that showed not just understanding but innovation. She must have made some sound, because suddenly his head snapped up, and their eyes met across the dim space. For a long moment, neither moved. Finn's expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and something else Larissa couldn't quite identify. She knew she should say something, make some excuse for being there, establish the proper CEO to security guard dynamic. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that sounded almost like running. The next evening, when Finn arrived for his shift, he found a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of his beat-up Honda Civic. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its clarity. "Why haven't you given up yet?" There was no signature, but Finn knew who had written it. He stood in the parking lot for a full minute, reading those 6 words over and over, trying to decode what they really meant. Finally, he folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, where it rested against his chest like a secret. He didn't expect her to come back, but 3 nights later, there she was again. This time, she didn't hide. She walked directly to where he sat, stopping just outside the circle of his flashlight's glow. "That algorithm you were working on," she said without preamble. "It's flawed." Finn looked up at her, taking in the designer clothes that probably cost more than he made in a month, the perfect posture that spoke of years of finishing school or ballet or both, the expression that gave away nothing. "I know," he said simply. "The recursive function creates a memory leak when the dataset exceeds 10,000 items." Her eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch, the closest thing to surprise he had seen from her. "And your solution? Implement a cleanup protocol every 1,000 iterations. It's not elegant, but it works." "Inefficient," she countered. "Better to restructure the entire approach using dynamic programming." For the next hour, they discussed code architecture while Larissa stood and Finn sat, the conversation flowing with an ease that surprised them both. She challenged his assumptions with surgical precision. He defended his choices with quiet logic. When she finally left, Finn realized it was the first real conversation he'd had in months that didn't revolve around security protocols or the weather. Larissa began appearing regularly after that, always late at night, always with some thin excuse about checking systems or reviewing operations. They talked about technology, about books Finn was reading to supplement his online courses, about the philosophy of self-directed learning. She never sat, never fully entered his small circle of light, maintaining a physical distance that seemed to represent something larger. "Why programming?" she asked one night. Apropos of nothing, Finn considered the question, his pencil tapping against his notebook. "Because code doesn't lie. It either works or it doesn't. There's no gray area, no room for interpretation." After the Marines, I needed something absolute. The Marines, she repeated, and he could hear the calculation in her voice, fitting this new piece of information into whatever picture she was building of him. 3 tours in Afghanistan, he said, then added, I don't talk about it. Good, she replied. I don't talk about my past either. It was the closest thing to personal information she had offered, and Finn filed it away carefully, understanding instinctively that she was someone who gave away pieces of herself like a miser parting with gold coins. What Finn didn't know was that Larissa had started looking forward to these encounters with an intensity that frightened her. She would sit in her office, watching the clock, forcing herself to wait until at least 1 in the morning before making her way to the warehouse. She had memorized his schedule, knew which nights he worked, which sections of the warehouse he preferred for studying. She had even, in a moment of weakness she couldn't explain, looked up the online courses he was taking, reading through the syllabi to better understand what he was learning. The attachment she was forming felt like a betrayal of everything she had built since David's deception, but she couldn't seem to stop herself from seeking out those late-night conversations, from testing herself against the steady warmth of Finn's presence. He never pushed, never asked for more than she offered, never tried to leverage their talks into anything inappropriate. He simply accepted her presence, the way he accepted the cold warehouse, and the long hours, and the distance between where he was and where he wanted to be. Then Bernard Hutchinson entered the picture. As Senior Vice President of Operations, Bernard had his own ambitions, specifically Larissa's job. He had been watching for any sign of weakness, any crack in her armor that he could exploit. When he noticed her unusual patterns in the security logs, her late-night visits to areas of the building she had no operational reason to visit, he sensed opportunity. Through careful observation and strategic placement of his allies in security, Bernard discovered her warehouse visits. More importantly, he discovered who she was visiting. A security guard with a military background and no college degree, someone so far beneath the CEO's notice that the only explanation for her attention had to be personal. Bernard began documenting everything, building a case that would suggest an inappropriate relationship, a scandal that would force the board to reconsider Larissa's position. His first move was subtle but effective. He restructured the security schedules, citing efficiency concerns, moving Finn to the satellite warehouse across town. The new location was smaller, noisier, with no quiet corners for studying. Finn accepted the transfer without complaint, though he understood exactly what it meant. The next night, Larissa arrived at the main warehouse to find his usual spot empty, and something cold and familiar settled in her chest, the feeling of being outmaneuvered. She could have reversed the transfer with a single phone call, but that would have shown her hand, admitted to an interest she couldn't afford to acknowledge. Instead, she buried herself deeper in work, staying later, arriving earlier, trying to exhaust herself past the point of thinking about a security guard studying by flashlight in a warehouse across town. 2 weeks passed before the crisis that changed everything. The automated climate control system in the main warehouse had been malfunctioning for days, requiring manual resets every few hours. Larissa had gone down personally to oversee the repair, wanting to ensure no inventory was damaged by temperature fluctuations. She was in the control room when the system crashed completely, the magnetic locks engaging as part of the emergency protocol, trapping her inside the small, windowless space. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who prided herself on control, on never being vulnerable, was now locked in a glorified closet, dependent on others to free her. She tried her cell phone, but the control room's metal walls blocked the signal. The emergency intercom was part of the same system that had crashed. She was calculating how long the air would last when she heard someone working on the door's manual release from the outside. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and Finn stood there, his uniform dusty from crawling through the ventilation shaft to reach the external manual override that the repair crew hadn't even known existed. "The satellite warehouse is closed for fumigation," he explained, answering her unspoken question. "I was pulling a shift here. Saw the system crash on the monitors." They stood there for a moment, Larissa still inside the control room, Finn in the doorway, and something shifted between them. She had been rescued before, helped before, but always by people who wanted something in return, who saw her vulnerability as an opportunity. Finn just looked tired, and maybe a little amused. "You know," he said, "for someone who spends so much time thinking about systems and fail-safes, you might want to keep a crowbar in your office." The laugh escaped before she could stop it. Short and surprised, and his eyes widened slightly, as if he had just witnessed something miraculous. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "Just doing my job," he replied, but they both knew it was more than that. As she walked past him out of the control room, their shoulders brushed, and the brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. She didn't look back, but she could feel him watching her leave, and for once, she didn't mind being observed. The next morning, Finn found an official Caldwell Industries envelope on his car. Inside was an invitation to join the company's new technical development program, a fast-track initiative for employees showing exceptional potential in technology fields. The program would pay for his education, provide mentorship, and guarantee a position in the IT department upon completion. At the bottom, in that same architectural handwriting, was a note. "This time, it's for you, not for me." Finn stared at the letter for a long time, understanding both the opportunity and the risk it represented. Accepting would mean acknowledging whatever was happening between them, stepping into a dynamic that could destroy them both. But refusing would mean continuing to study by flashlight, continuing to work toward a future that might never come, continuing to pretend that those late-night conversations hadn't become the highlight of his weeks. He submitted his acceptance that afternoon. Bernard made his move 3 weeks into Finn's participation in the program. He had been patient, gathering security footage, documenting every interaction between Larissa and Finn, building a narrative of favoritism and inappropriate conduct. He presented his findings first to selected board members, the ones he knew were already skeptical of Larissa's leadership, planting seeds of doubt wrapped in concern for the company's reputation. The whispers started in the executive washrooms and spread through the building like spilled coffee, staining everything they touched. The CEO and the security guard. The Ice Queen and her pet project. By the time Larissa heard the rumors, they had taken on a life of their own, morphing from inappropriate interest to full-blown affair, complete with imagined details that made her skin crawl. She could have denied everything, could have provided explanations for every documented interaction, but she knew how these things worked. Denial would only fuel speculation. Instead, she chose silence, maintaining her routine, her composure, her distance, even as she watched Finn become the subject of break-room gossip and knowing looks. Finn handled it with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything, showing up for his program sessions, completing his coursework, ignoring the whispers that followed him through the hallways. But Larissa could see the strain in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was paying for her interest in him, and the guilt of it sat in her stomach like a stone. The formal inquiry came on a Thursday. Bernard had convinced enough board members that an investigation was necessary to protect the company's interests. Finn was suspended from the program pending the outcome, a move that was technically within protocol but clearly punitive. Larissa sat in the boardroom, listening to Bernard present his case with theatrical concern, watching the faces of board members she had thought were allies, and realized she had been outplayed. Audrey Chen, the CFO, and the closest thing Larissa had to a friend, cornered her after the meeting. "Fight back," Audrey said. "Tell them the truth." "What truth?" Larissa replied. "That I was fascinated by a security guard studying programming? That I looked forward to our conversations about code architecture? That sounds worse than an affair. If you don't defend yourself, they'll destroy him to get to you." Larissa knew Audrey was right, But she also knew that defending Finn meant admitting to feelings she had spent years teaching herself not to have. It meant being vulnerable in front of people who would use that vulnerability against her. It meant risking everything she had built for someone she had known for a few months. The special board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. The entire weekend, Larissa prepared her resignation letter. It was the logical choice, the strategic choice. Step down quietly, maintain dignity, protect the company from scandal. Let Finn return to his program without the shadow of her interest hanging over him. It was the kind of cold, calculated decision she had built her reputation on. Monday arrived gray and raining, the kind of Seattle weather that seemed designed to match corporate drama. The boardroom was full, all 12 members present, with Bernard sitting to the right of the chairman, trying and failing to hide his satisfaction. Larissa entered precisely at 9. Her resignation letter and her portfolio, her expression giving away nothing. Bernard presented his case with the confidence of someone who knew he had already won. The security footage, the scheduled changes, the enrollment in the development program, all painted a picture of a CEO who had crossed professional boundaries. He was careful never to directly accuse, instead letting the implications hang in the air like smoke, poisonous but impossible to grasp. When he finished, the chairman turned to Larissa. "Do you have anything to say in response to these concerns?" She reached for her portfolio, ready to submit her letter, when the boardroom door opened. Finn stood in the doorway, wearing not his security uniform but a suit that was clearly new, probably purchased just for this moment. He looked uncomfortable but determined, like someone about to jump from a plane and trusting his parachute would open. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, his voice steady, "but I have information relevant to this discussion." The chairman looked at Bernard, who had gone pale. "This is highly irregular." "Please," Finn said. 5 minutes. Before anyone could object, he moved to the presentation screen, pulling out a USB drive. What appeared on the screen made Larissa's breath catch. It was the complete design for an automated warehouse management system, elegant in its simplicity, revolutionary in its approach. The code was clean, annotated, beautiful in the way that mathematics could be beautiful. "I developed this over the past 3 months, Finn said, clicking through slides that showed implementation plans, cost savings projections, efficiency improvements. It could reduce operational costs by 30%, while improving accuracy by 50%. I didn't create this because of any inappropriate relationship or special treatment. I created it because someone believed I was capable of more than checking badges and walking perimeters." He turned to face the board directly. "Miss Caldwell noticed me studying in the warehouse and chose to encourage that. She discussed technology with me, challenged my thinking, pushed me to be better. If that's inappropriate, then every mentor-student relationship in this company is inappropriate. If recognizing potential and fostering it is wrong, then this company has bigger problems than imaginary scandals." His eyes found Bernard. "I know exactly who I am. A security guard with a GED and a military discharge. I know exactly where I come from and where I'm trying to go. I don't need special favors or inappropriate relationships. What I need is what every person in this room got at some point in their career, someone to see their potential and give them a chance to prove it." He placed the USB drive on the conference table. "This system is my proof. If you implement it, it will save the company millions. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. Have your best engineers review it. Test it. Break it if you can. And when you can't, when you realize that a security guard studying by flashlight created something your entire IT department hasn't managed, ask yourself what you're really investigating here." The room was silent. Finn straightened his tie, a gesture that would have been comical if the moment hadn't been so charged. "I'll be returning to my security position now," he said. "My shift starts in an hour." He walked out without looking at Larissa. though she desperately wanted him to, wanted to see in his eyes what this had cost him. As the door closed behind him, she felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking but opening, like ice beginning its spring thaw. The board voted to table the investigation pending review of Finn's system. 3 weeks later, after extensive testing proved everything he had claimed, they voted to implement it company-wide. Bernard's own investigation turned against him when IT security discovered he had been accessing surveillance systems outside his authority, a violation that led to his immediate suspension and eventual termination. Finn was offered a position as a junior systems engineer, which he accepted with the condition that he be allowed to complete his degree part-time. He moved from the night shift to days, from the warehouse to an office 3 floors below Larissa's, from the margins of the company to its center. They didn't speak for a month after the board meeting. Larissa threw herself into the merger proposal, Finn into his new position and studies. But late at night, she would find herself walking past his old spot in the warehouse, remembering the first time she had seen him there, illuminated by that weak flashlight, refusing to give up. Then one evening, as she was leaving the building at the merely late hour of 9 o'clock, she found him in the warehouse, not studying but standing in his old spot, hands in his pockets, looking at something she couldn't see. "Nostalgia?" she asked, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. He turned, and the smile he gave her was worth every moment of uncertainty she had felt over the past months. "Gratitude," he corrected. This is where everything changed. She moved closer, stepping into what had been his circle of light, though now the overhead fluorescence illuminated everything. "I never thanked you," she said, "for what you did in the boardroom. You never had to. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to. We're even, are we?" The question carried more weight than 2 words should be able to hold. He studied her for a moment, and she realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped being unreadable to him. He could see through her professional armor to the woman underneath, the one who had been so badly hurt she had forgotten how to trust, how to hope, how to want something beyond success. "No," he said, finally. "We're not even. But we could be something else." "Like what?" "Like 2 people who understand each other, who push each other to be better, who might, if they're very careful and very brave, try to build something together." She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The power dynamic, the gossip, the vulnerability it would require. Then she thought about those late-night conversations, about the way he had looked at her when he freed her from the control room, about the courage it had taken for him to stand in front of the board and defend not just himself but her. "I don't know how to be careful," she admitted. "I only know how to be closed or completely open. And the last time I was open, someone hurt you," he finished. "Someone used your trust against you. Someone made you believe that being vulnerable was the same as being weak." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you," he said. "But I can promise it will never be intentional, never be cruel, never be about using you for something else. I'm not built that way." "How do you know?" "Because I've been broken too. Different reasons, different ways, but broken just the same. And I know what it takes to put yourself back together. How precious that reconstruction is. I wouldn't damage that in someone else. Couldn't." They stood there in the warehouse where it had all began, 2 people who had learned to be alone finding the possibility of being together, and Larissa made a choice that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Dinner," she said. "Tomorrow night. Somewhere public. Somewhere appropriate. Somewhere that's clearly not a date but could be the beginning of something that might eventually become one." "I know just the place," he said. A year later, the warehouse had been fully automated using Finn's system. But his old study spot had been preserved, turned into a small break area for the warehouse staff. Someone, Probably Audrey, though she would never admit it, had installed a small plaque on the wall, where the light begins. Finn stood there now. Senior Systems Engineer, Finn Whitaker, watching the automated systems he had designed move with balletic precision through the space where he had once sat with his flashlight and dreams. He had his degree now, earned through nights and weekends of study. But he kept his old notebook, the one filled with handwritten code and late-night revelations. In his pocket was a small box containing his old flashlight and a note from Larissa, written in her architectural handwriting but softer somehow, more human. The warehouse, the flashlight, and you warmed the parts of me I thought had frozen forever. He heard her heels clicking on the concrete before he saw her. That distinctive rhythm he would know anywhere. She appeared around a